At $200, a Super Nintendo setup costs twice as much as the old system. For the money, the company promises better pictures, sound, and adventure. Now you're playing with power, superpower. You're the king, I tell you! The king!
Only for Super NES. Only on Super NES. You're listening to the SNES Podcast with your host, Soulblazer.
Hello, folks. This is Super NES Podcast, episode number 208. These are your hosts. I am Greg. He is Joe.
Hello.
And today we're covering a game that I had wanted to cover for a while, and probably a game that Joe would have picked eventually, probably, I think, because both of us have history and or love of the franchise that this game, this game came from. We're looking at Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: The Tournament Fighters game, Super NES in this podcast. Though to be fair, we will compare and contrast this version of the game to its NES and Genesis counterparts, as well as the more modern re-release of the game on the Cowabunga Collection, like for a complete experience. So, this is not the first Turtles game we covered on the franchise from the franchise on the podcast already. So we won't go too deep into this as far as our history. But both of us grew up with Turtles. Both of us have a lot of both of us have enjoyed Turtles. Joe probably went deeper into the franchise even than I did, because I think that because this is to be relevant later on, Joe. Because I think I remember you saying that you read some of the comics too, whereas I never did.
Yeah, especially at this time, I was big into like the Archie comics, which spoiler is really good for this particular game in itself.
Yep. We are going to talk about that because it's interesting, but I never read any of the comics. The comics, I was just entirely invested like in the TV show, the movies, and the toys. I mean, I read some of the comics, and I borrowed an issue here or there, but I never actually bought them because it's like I wasn't a big comic book fan as a kid. I liked reading them, but as far as buying them, I just rather my money go somewhere else. Yeah. And this, this game came out, and this game came out in 93, 94, when the Turtles were definitely at their peak as far as the first generation,
absolutely.
Like them ran. And also 93, 94 was the peak of the whole fighting game craze, because Street Fighter 2 had come out in 1991 in the arcades, and the home versions came out in 93, so it's like everybody wanted to have like fighting games. So it's like Konami, obviously being a big company, wanted to have their own Street Fighter 2-esque game. They had the license to Turtles at the time. It seemed like a match made in heaven, because it's like, and we talked about this before in past podcasts, but most ports for games back then, especially Super NES and Genesis ports, were done by the same team, the same company. Well, maybe not the same team. Sometimes literally it was the same team if they were really small and trying to pinch pennies. But usually it's like the ports were done by different people, but they were like very quick efforts because they didn't have the resources or really the care to really want to tailor the games to the strengths of each system. So a lot of ports, that you have Genesis versus Super NES, as we said before in this podcast numerous times, just basically like, okay, slight graphical enhancements, slight music changes, they remap the controller, that's it. So because for most ports, that's all they really did. But Konami, however, because of its size, they were able to dedicate different teams and different and a good amount of resources toward different versions of the games or consoles. So like announce this game for NES, Super NES, Genesis. I'm like, okay. Even as a kid, I knew there were going to be sizable differences between them because it's Konami we're talking about here. Because they were definitely one of the best companies in the 90s and 2000s as far as games went. So, and again, it showed because although the premise and the overall gameplay is the same for all three versions of the game, there are noticeable differences between all three of them. So it's like it's the differences are actually big enough that I think it's big enough that I think it's worthwhile saying now. And Joe, I don't, I'm not sure if you agree with me or not, but I think that the differences of the games are enough that if you're a fan of one, it's worthwhile playing the other two to see how they compare, because maybe you might find another version like more to your liking, as far as the differences went.
Yeah, and I think there's enough differences between them, that, of the time, if you were in 1993 today and we were, somehow reviewing these and you were hearing it, I think it would be, a good option to be able to pick up any of these because they do differ so much. I think the Super Nintendo and Genesis ones are pretty close as far as gameplay and graphical things and whatever else, but definitely the NES one, more than likely at this time, probably was a $40 game. And I think it would have been worth that, just to have a fighter in general on the NES. I mean, how many fighters were on the NES?
Very, very little. I was going to say that. There was that failed Street Fighter. There was that failed Street Fighter clone. I can't remember the name of it right now. That came out for the system also. But and then maybe one other. I think maybe I'm not sure, but because this was the late NES game. The Super NES Genesis version, the Super NES Genesis versions of the game dropped the same days. September 4th, 1993, like North America, coming out later on that year in both like Japan and PAL markets. The NES version didn't drop until February of '94. So, as a matter of fact, this was Konami's last NES game, like North America. That's how late the game was in the system's lifespan. But.
Yeah. Yep.
And they didn't bother releasing the game in Japan because like why bother for an 8-bit system? So,
right.
Because Japan's always been ahead of us. Actually, I guess not. Yeah. Let me walk that back. They used to be ahead of us by year two. By year two in technical advances like video game consoles. Nowadays, that's not very true. Because more like the worldization of the market and the fact that more and more companies are springing up in North America and Europe to make stuff like game consoles and computers, DVD players, and whatnot. You don't see that same tech edge and that used to have back then, which is like the VHS came out in Japan 3 years before it finally came out in North America, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So, but
I mean, for the most part, systems are releasing pretty much the same day worldwide. You don't see the, multiple year gap like we used to.
Right. Yeah.
And the same with games. A lot of the games are dropped day one in both, Japan and here in the West.
Which actually causes some problems because it's like, just to give a humorous example, when the remake of Resident Evil 4 dropped recently, Capcom set the release of the game to be timed, so it was the same time around the world, 12-minute local time.
Right.
Because some people were going so far as to modify their systems to trick the system to thinking they were like 10 hours ahead of what they actually were to get the game early. Because I mean, I don't blame them because there was a lot of hype for that game and it pretty much lived up to the hype, but. Right. But it's like, yeah, so it's funny because like the game's ready on the servers. You already have downloaded probably, most folks already had it preloaded in their systems, like ready to go. Like you're playing the Steam version of the game at least. And you're like, and you're like, well, we can just like do a little bit of hacking here and get the game early. But so, it's funny. It's really interesting how, it's really interesting how much it changed like in recent years, but. Yeah. But anyway, following up on your point, there are people who are talking about these. There are people who are reviewing these games contemporary because these games were part of several games released in the Cowabunga Collection last year. Right. So there are people who are playing these games the first time, I think, but and all three versions of the game do offer enhancements and improvements on that collection as opposed to the original console versions. So I played all three versions of the game, the Cowabunga Collection, just to like compare and contrast them. Joe, I know we talked about like you had the Genesis version growing up. Yep. But you did play the NES version a little bit too as well. So
correct.
the overall, like I said, the overall theme of the game is the same across all three platforms. Because you at least have three modes, maybe more depending upon the version of the game you're playing, but at least have three modes. You have a tournament mode, which allows you to just pick your fighter and just go through the game tournament style, a la Street Fighter 2. There's a story mode, which allows you to play a more limited selection of characters, but story mode, there's like a story beat, a fight, story beat, a fight, and so on and so on.
Yeah, and I think all three games for story mode, you can only play as the four turtles.
I think you're right. I'll confirm that by my notes, like while we're going through this. But the story does differ from version to version of the game, which I thought was interesting. But
yes,
because it's like
the Genesis one takes place on Dimension X, in Dimension X, and you fight on different planets, which was pretty cool. Like, it was a very interesting concept for the Genesis version, for sure.
And there's also like a versus mode, of course, where it's like you're able to play either against like two people or four people, like some versions of the game. So, the overall stages are the same for each three versions of the game. Obviously the overall look and feel and what characters are included in the background, background versus who's not changes from game to game. But the overall stages are mostly the same as far as that goes. Controls, the moves are pretty much the same. Again, I got to be very careful when saying that. When saying that for this game, because I said before, there are more differences between the versions of the game for this than any other fighting game we probably have covered in the podcast already at this point. So, anyway, so why don't we go into Super NES version of the game first, and then we'll compare and contrast the other version of the game later on. So the Super NES version of the game, obviously the Super NES has a 4-button controller. It uses, so the game uses those 4 buttons pretty well, I thought. You're pretty good, pretty typical fighting setup for a game on the Super NES. It's like, 2 punches, 2 kicks, super special attack, which you get by you fill up the green bar like on your life bar, and then use special attack. You have to hit 2 buttons simultaneously. That's the only drawback about the controllers, I think, but it's not that bad once you get the hang of it. But you can also enhance it. You can also enhance the speed of the game if you want to as well too, which I thought was an interesting touch, because it's like it makes it more difficult, but it also makes the fights slightly more intense, and therefore I think like more interesting. It's definitely it's almost kind of like easy mode versus hard mode in some ways. They're trying to speed up, I think. So there's 10 characters available in this version of the game. Plus 2 bosses. So in the characters in the characters game, I didn't know about this because it's been a long time since I played this game myself until I started getting into the game for the podcast. Some of the other characters and bosses, they did some deep dives into the franchise on this, because it's like there's people here from the movies and the comics as well too. So, which I'll probably have Joe talk about here in a bit, because he has more familiarity with that than I do. But it was surprising to see just how deep. It's surprising to see them do that, because it's like they could have just easily taken characters like in the cartoon, like in past games, and be done with it. But Konami took the effort to we have the license to use everything. Let's use everything. But and then as is customary at the time period, the game name was changed slightly depending upon region of the game, what region that the game was in. As I said before, Tournament Fighters was the North American version of the name. In Europe, of course, there's the whole renaming to Hero Turtles, because of the whole connotation against ninja that I think most people listening to the podcast know about. And then in Japan, the name got changed also for some reason to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Warriors. So I don't know what was up with that, but it's interesting. So anyway, now that I got all the setup out of the way, Joe, why don't you go into the gameplay and talk about the characters if you want to?
Yeah, so this game really does use the controller perfectly. So you got your 6 buttons on the controller. You're mainly using your 4 face buttons. You got your 2 punches, your 2 kicks, and that gives you 2 weak attacks and 2 strong attacks. You fill a mutagen bar by doing damage to your opponent. And as that mutagen bar fills, when you get to the max...
Oh, is that what that's supposed to be? I never knew that.
So the mutagen bar, once you get that full, you can hit strong kick and strong punch together, and they'll do a super special move.
Okay.
And each character has a different and unique super special move. So I did not write down the intricacies of those special moves. So I encourage you to check that out and experiment for yourself.
They are pretty faithful to the turtles themselves, though, I thought, because it's like, they could just simply, I was going to comment on this later on, but it seems appropriate here because it's like, again, Konami put a lot of care into this because it's like, it is very Street Fighter 2-ish in many ways. Mm-hmm. But then in some ways, the characters still fight. To me at least, fighting with them felt different than fighting with a Street Fighter 2 character.
Yeah.
They weren't just simply, they weren't just simply a clone from those characters as other fighting games did at the time period, which I'm sure you also can probably name an example or two like that as well, Joe. But
yeah, and the thing is too is I felt like there was a different timing when doing certain like half circle moves or something like that to be able to do the specials that you do have. I don't know, like I because maybe I'm so used to Street Fighter, like it felt like it was a slower input to be able to do the special moves compared to Street Fighter where it's like you're like rolling your thumb to be able to get that half circle. Here it felt like you could actually kind of just press back, down, forward, and then hit whatever button you needed to, and you would get the action. So it's kind of nice to see that it was forgiving like that. I didn't have to be precise every single time. One of the things I want to talk about is we might as well dig into these characters. So, like Greg said, we have 10 characters. We have the 4 turtles. One thing that upset me is Shredder isn't Shredder. It's Cyber Shredder. It's not even a real Shredder. So we get a robotic Shredder, which I found interesting. This is the only game that has Shredder in it. The Genesis one, by the way, is totally messed up because it only has heroes to choose from. The entire game is heroes. There are no villains except for, I think in the story mode, I think you fight, I can't think of his name. You end up fighting someone, but I can't think of the name right now. Amagon. There we go.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyways, the shark one that's in this game.
We'll also just like real quick like about Shredder. I think that the story mode, the Super NES version of the game, does cover that a little bit by saying this game takes place after the events of your Turtles in Time. So it's like I think it's assumed that Shredder was defeated, therefore the Cyber Shredder. So
yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
Yeah, the story does make a quick allude to that.
Yeah, and then we have War. War comes from the Archie comics. He's kind of like he looks like a Stegosaurus, kind of, but he's got like weird webbed feet, and he's just an odd character. They definitely made some interesting choices with these characters.
They did, yes.
Sure. Wingnut is one of the other fighters. He also comes from the Archie comics, but he was also in the cartoon.
I remember him from that, yep.
Chrome Dome, in this setting, Chrome Dome is a villain, but he was in the Archie comics and the cartoon as well, and he originally started off as a robot that Shredder had built and programmed to take on the Turtles. Then we have Amagon, which I don't know how many videos I saw on YouTube calling him Armageddon, and I'm like, there's no D there. He also comes from the Archie comics, and that he's kind of like a throwback as far as the Archie comics go. There was late in the Archie comic arc, they had like Manta Ray, who ends up showing up in the Genesis version, and man, I can't think of the other guy's name. But,
Yeah, the Archie Comics series ran for a long time, like 7 years. So
yeah,
it's like, that's
yeah,
it,
and later in the series, they started, like, they had a mutant, it's like, they're not called the Mutant Brigade, but there was some sort of, like, interplanetary mutant.
Oh, the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse.
Yeah, kind of thing, yeah,
Yep,
and
yep.
Amagon was part of that. And of course, with all these characters, you also get fantastic levels, and, man, the levels, I mean, this is going to go kind of into, like, the graphics and whatnot of the game.
It was one of the characters, it was one of the character presents that present the game, too.
Oh.
I think her name is pronounced like Asuka.
I didn't even write her down because
Yeah.
I specifically...
She's interesting to me because it's like, she was she was originally supposed to be like Mitsu, like
yes. So that's why I didn't write her down because I was going to put separately, the whole story of that thing in my notes, and I totally forgot to.
It's not much of a story. It's like in the design phase, she was supposed to be Mitsu, like the third movie,
right?
But as I said again. Exactly. That's how they changed it. So,
yeah.
So like, it's like, so we'll make an original character instead. I mean, like, it's still clearly inspired by Mitsu.
Yeah.
They're almost the same character because it's like Ninja Girl, like, seeking to open up her own dojo. So,
yeah.
And this is the only time that she's appeared. So,
yep.
Which is interesting. Probably because, like, she was created by Konami employees, I guess. So I guess technically she'd still be. I guess technically Konami would still have the rights to use her.
Yeah,
so,
I guess technically, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm not sure exactly how that worked but anyway.
And now thinking that I did miss her, I might as well mention the two boss characters that technically can't play as, but there are codes to unlock them.
We will get to that. Yep.
So you have the Rat King, who of course showed up in not only the Archie comics but also the cartoon. And then the oddball here is Karai, who showed up in the original Mirage comics. Never showed up in the cartoon until
since showed up like another. Yeah. I was gonna say, like, she's since shown up like a bunch of other like Turtles media. But, this was but this was only her second appearance, and you're right. Like, it is odd because it's like I said, Konami really went to the well of, like, trying to decide who they wanted to put in this game. Because it's like, like taking characters from the comics and somebody who's supposed to be like one of the movies.
Yeah.
It's surprising. Like, I was thinking before, they didn't have to do that. I'm glad they did.
Yeah.
But because it's like, they did a little bit with. They did a little bit for the home release of Turtles in Time too as well, by using by using I can't remember their name.
Tokon.
Yes, exactly, like the movie. So it's like, there are other cuts, but Tournament Fighters having deep cuts like this was not what I expected playing the game.
Yeah. I feel like Konami was like, we can sell this as a fighting game. It doesn't matter who we have in it. And they kind of just went ham on, like, okay, well, who would look cool?
Well, there also was the fact that I think that Konami was thinking, like, okay, the Turtles are popular like young kids. The Archie comics are mostly read by younger kids.
Right.
There's target audience here that we're going after because because
you also have to think of too, like, as far as the three systems that this game came out for. Which one is the more popular? Which one is going to sell more copies? It's going to be the Super Nintendo version. So it makes sense that this would be the version that you would gear more towards the kids than you would, say, the NES, which was obviously going out of style and slowly going away, or the Genesis, which was clearly geared towards more mature gamers.
Right.
That's literally how it was marketed. So, I see why they went with the characters they went with here. Right.
So, so some of the characters are pretty fun to use. Like, I thought that the Chromium was pretty interesting to use. I liked using him. Asuka takes some getting used to, I think, but I think once you get used to her, I think she's fun. I played Leonardo a lot, of course, because he's my favorite turtle. So, who's your favorite or least favorite character to play as?
So, believe it or not, I had a great time playing with Cyber Shredder.
Okay, I can see that. Yep.
So he's quick enough. He's kind of beefy. Actually, kind of mirrors almost my favorite Street Fighter character, Bison. So I've always been an M. Bison guy, always. And that's one of the reasons why I love the Sega Genesis Championship Edition, because I could play as Bison, which is what I was doing in the arcade anyways. So to this day, whenever a new Street Fighter game comes out, I always choose Bison. That literally will cement like how I feel about the game as a whole. If I can play Bison and still be able to pull off the same moves that I've been doing for 30 years and do it flawlessly, then, game gets 2 big thumbs up for me. But yeah, so Cyber Shredder kind of plays that way. He even has moves that kind of mirror what Bison has. He doesn't, obviously like glide across the ground or anything like that. But he's got, this sweeping kick that he does that's, will knock you on your butt and keep you there for a bit, which is kind of nice. Sometimes it dazes you, which then you can get some throws in. The biggest thing for me was the super special that Shredder has. With the super special, he does like an uppercut, and it's almost unblockable. I every time I did it, I did not get blocked, and also whenever I fought Cyber Shredder, it was always unblockable when he did it to me. So, yeah, that's the one I had the most fun and probably most time with. The other one would be Chrome Dome. He plays kind of the same way, kind of more of a tank than anything else, but he's also got some quick lightning fast moves that he can do. And as far as the Turtles go, I've always been flip-floppy as far as Donatello and Leonardo. So with this one, I did play as Donatello, and I felt he played all right,
Yeah, I do want to. So I already mentioned this before, but briefly. But I do want to emphasize the fact that I really think that I think even maybe, and this is and this may be a controversial statement, Joe. So feel free to argue with me if you want to. I actually think that the repertoire of characters available in this game may even be, as far as differences, as far as variety, maybe better than what Street Fighter 2 offers, because it's like there's a character here to match your play style. If you prefer just to go in and fight close and grapple, there's there's a character for that. Like if you prefer just to stand off a distance and just like shoot fireballs or blades or whatever, you can do that. If you want to do like long range fancy aerial attacks, you can do that. As a character, all the characters here are different enough that it really feels like the game's more accommodating to a wider range of playstyles than the early Street Fighter 2 games even offered. I mean, yes, eventually the franchise did evolve more in that direction, but I think that again, this is a case where we're like, something comes along, is very popular, does very well. Something else comes along, sees it, and it's like, okay, this is very good, but we can improve upon like an X, Y, and Z. And I think this game did that in many ways. So I really appreciate the wide variety of different playstyles, the characters like this game like allow you.
Yeah, and I'm not going to argue your point, because you are correct. I think they emphasized the variety a lot more here than maybe they did with Street Fighter. That being said, with Street Fighter 2, if you wanted close combat, you either played as Zangief or Blanca. Both of them had devastating moves that were very useful up close. Your projectile characters is like Guile, Ryu, and Ken. And then if you wanted your fast agile characters, you had Chun-Li and Sagat. And then obviously with Championship Edition, that included Vega. And then Balrog was another close and fighting guy. And then Bison was kind of your projectile type guy, because he could do the whole Psycho Crusher tornado thing. But yeah, I mean, the variety's good here. There's not like, I think later fighting games kind of relied too much on combos to, really differentiate the characters. Like, all the characters were kind of mediocre, but if you could pull up the combos, that's what made them better. Where this is specifically like, hey, if you're, want to be fast and agile, we have Asuka who can, do all that for you. If you want to just be a beefy, meaty guy and go after some people, here's Shredder or Amagon, So,
Did you spend more time playing this game in normal mode, or fast mode?
So I played more in normal mode because I knew I'd get my butt kicked. So that's actually one of the things I liked about the Genesis game over this one. So with this one, you have to go into the options. You have to set your game speed, and that's the default game speed. Mm-hmm. That's it. With the Genesis, you don't even have to go into the options. The minute you choose your fighter, you get that option of speed. And then you can turn it up or down however you like, which is kind of nice because if you turned it up because you wanted a bit of a challenge and you got your butt kicked, when you continued, you could actually drop that game speed down. Whereas, here you're going to have to, hit the reset button or quit out of the game, get back to the main menu, basically lose your progress where, in the Genesis, it kind of made it a little more accessible as far as that goes.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I can see that. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think we've probably beat gameplay to the ground at this point. Graphics and sound. Joe mentioned a bit earlier. The stages like these games are very good. The Super NES version really shows off the system's rich color, color palette. This is a fairly, mid-life style, early Super NES game. So it's the characters are all large and detailed. There's not too much choppiness. There's a little bit of choppiness here and there. It's not really all that bad. The stages are all very different, varieties. It's fun seeing all the background characters who show up in the background of the stages. You have some Dimension X aliens in one, and Mauser's in another. I do wish Bebop and Rocksteady had actually been playable in the game though, as opposed to background characters. If I have a complaint about the game, it's probably that's my biggest complaint.
I was gonna say that's some of the things I pointed out too.
Yeah. But and some of the background stages are just fun to fight in, the whole the one about the game show, the game show one, the Rockettes in the background,
right?
But that's silly, but it's fun. But Konami of course plastered advertising all over the place, but you have to be expected because it's a game. But there's a wide variety of stages, and the graphics for early / mid Super NES game are very good. Music is also very good as well too. The soundtrack's not as good as past Turtles games, I think, but it is a very Turtle-ish / fighting game appropriate soundtrack. And there are a couple of songs that I thought were inspired by, if not really remixes, but at least inspired by Turtles in Time music as well too.
Yeah,
so,
for sure.
But do you have anything to say about that?
Well, I just want to point out that some of the background characters that you will see in the game are different color foot soldiers, which is a nice throwback to the arcade games.
Right.
Because they weren't different colors in the cartoon or the comics. The neutrinos sitting in the background with Mausers as well, walking around, as you had mentioned. I thought it was funny that you said aliens while I actually had the neutrinos written down. But, that just shows, I used to, I was big into the comics and everything else. So, yeah. I got to enjoy the neutrinos a little more than someone who just watched the cartoon. The neutrinos showed up a few times here and there, but in the comics, they're pretty prevalent. Bebop and Rocksteady, and I love how, they're almost positioned like the flight crew on the tarmac in Street Fighter 2 on Guile's stage, where like they're kind of like half sitting, half, I think one of them standing, and they're like doing the fist bump while the fight's happening. I thought that was really nice to see that animation. And then Baxter Stockman was another one I noticed in the background, which was pretty awesome. But that brings me to the question, like, why didn't you go the extra step? And maybe it's memory restraints. That's very possible. I don't know what the size of this ROM was and what size cart they used or whatever. But, like, I feel like they showed a couple of the neutrinos in the background, so you could have had at least one of them. They could have been your quick fighting type character like Asuka. Bebop and Rocksteady could have easily been fleshed out and should have been, and been playable. And then same with Baxter Stockman, or at least have Baxter Stockman as like one of the major, like bosses. Have 3 bosses instead of 2 because, especially and we'll get into story mode, but like with Baxter Stockman, he created the Mausers to specifically go after Splinter, so it would make sense to have him as a boss rather than the Rat King. Rat King is fine, but like it was just kind of an odd, selection when you had these other models that you clearly made for the background.
Yeah.
And like you were saying, the graphics are fantastic. So I was a Genesis kid. We all know that. So I had this as a kid, and so the Genesis version is very muted. It's almost depressive compared to the Super Nintendo.
I was going to say, I was going to comment on this later on since you brought it up. I was going to use the word dark. The Genesis version of the game just looks darker for some reason. I mean, it looks pretty still, but it's still, but for some reason, like, but for some reason it's like, for some reason, like the whole game just got muted, but like the 2 shades for some reason.
Yeah, this is a prime example of Sega going for that mature audience by going darker, not only in tones, but also,
it could
darker
also be
in the graphics.
Yeah, it could also be a case of like the experience level of the programmers that Konami used for each version of the game too. I mean, like, I don't want to just assume that. Yeah. I mean, like, we don't know how experienced the Genesis team was, vis-a-vis their Super NES counterparts, but
yeah, I mean, that's fair. But yeah, like the Genesis to me just comes off really dark, and like I said, the Super Nintendo just pops, and I think for that, they may be pretty close graphically, but because the Super Nintendo pops so much, I think the Turtles look better. I think all the character models look a lot better here. Backgrounds, oh my god, the first one that really caught my eye was playing on the rooftop. And as you're scrolling, you can see different billboards and advertisements. And it just does it seamlessly. The train level, get you're on a moving train, so the background is constantly moving. And again, like it doesn't hiccup, nothing. It just powers right through. City Streets was another one that I thought was cool. It feels like you're playing, level 2 of the, Turtles arcade game. It's just more zoomed in, but you have like the thugs out on the side of the street, and there's so many little details that I love that you can see in this game.
Yes, which is very typical of Konami, like their games this time period. Too,
yeah.
So
before we get into story mode and all that, I just want to quickly point out tournament mode. You can play as anybody you want, and you're playing for money. That's it. You're just playing for money / points. And after every fight, there's like an interview with like April, basically like, oh, you won your fight. How do you feel? And they say some sort of catchphrase, and they have like stacks of cash around them. And then you occasionally have a bonus stage. I only saw one bonus stage, and that was where I had to kick a bunch of safes. I'm sure there's other bonus stages in tournament mode, but that was the only one.
Which is weird because it's like, wouldn't you have? Yeah, I saw that. And I thought it was. It's weird. I saw that. And I'm like, You missed a chance to do a bonus stage like revolve around pizza?
So, my first instinct was, oh, okay, so they really wanted to be Street Fighter 2, but they knew they couldn't do barrels, so they decided to drop safes from the sky.
And they couldn't do the
barrels.
car because...
Right.
A car because Final Fight had done that as well too, so it's like...
Right.
Well, what's left? So...
Right.
Yeah,
so it was one of those things where this is like where I was like, oh, okay, like at least they're like wearing their inspiration on their sleeve.
Yeah.
They're not trying to
I was
fool
actually
anybody.
surprised Pizza didn't make an appearance at all in this game. It's just, considering how big Pizza is,
Yeah.
connected with the Turtles, it's like, there's not even a hint of it anywhere. But
Yeah, and you would think like one of the stages is like you're in a diner. Like you're
yeah.
fighting in a diner. Like how hard
exactly.
would it have been to animate a pizza on the counter? That's it. Just put a pizza there. Like that's it.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, it's like it's like I mentioned before. It's fun seeing all the it's definitely fun seeing all the background characters, all the nods like other parts of the franchise. But it's like you wish you had a super big version of the game where you actually like play like plays like most of them. But
Yeah.
it is what it is. I think considering how many characters that Konami could have used, I think for the most part, even though they did do some deep cuts, I think I don't have any major complaints as to how the end product turned out, vis-a-vis the characters, because it's like, okay, maybe I never heard this guy, but you play well, and that's all I care about.
Right.
But anyway, yeah. So, yeah. So what else? So yeah. Some other. Oh yeah. So okay. So some other like Super NES notes. The Japanese version of the game does have some differences, and most of them are to make the game a little bit more mature. Which I guess they nod to the fact that in Japan, most video game players were a little bit older than the target market in North America and Europe at this time. So, Asuka's outfit is more revealing in the Japanese version of the game, for example. Right. She also has different wind animation. The turtles sound more like teenagers. In that version of the game, it's a noticeable difference as to how much the sound bite that they used vis-a-vis the North American versus Japanese version of the game. The character icons were also changed for some reason. I'm not sure why they did that, but so for a long time, if you wanted to play this game, you had to emulate it. But then that problem has been solved last year. Like the release of the excellent, in my opinion at least, but most people agree with me, Cowabunga Collection, which has done all the Turtles games released on consoles over the years. The classic Konami Turtle games, I should probably say. So, and they included all three versions, and they included all three versions of this game on there. Not only did they put in NetPlay, the Super NES version of games, you could play online, which is a great touch. They also added in like various enhancements. So some of these enhancements were present in the original version of the game through cheat codes. But in this version of the game, you can just simply go into the menu screen and at the menu screen, like just select them and select them like you want them like on and off. Playable bosses, play either this Direct King like or Cowabunga versus mode. Extra versus stages. It allows two additional stages to be sensible in versus mode. Maximum speed. You're able. There's actually three speed settings in this version of the game compared to two that the original had. So you really can crank things up if you want to. And extra lives. You're able to go up to like 10 credits in story mode. In that setting. So adding the other enhancements that all the games in the collection have. Save states, rewindability, et cetera, and this is definitely an excellent version of the game. If you want to play any version of this game today, it's really hard to say not to do the Cowabunga Collection version of it, because you can still have original, you can still play it original if you want to, but the other enhancements that they added onto the collection, both overall for the collection and also game specific, are very nice. So, This game plays very smoothly in the collection, and is like a blast to play. And the controller doesn't seem to matter too much either, because I played it with both the original Super NES controller and also my Xbox 360 controller that I used for the they used that on Steam playing, and it works great both versions. So yes, I'm very happy with it. Like overall. Before we move on to touch upon the other versions quickly, and finally wrap things up, Joe. Anything else you want to say about the Super NES version of the game?
So yeah, I just wanted to quickly discuss the story mode, just because it does vary from the other two versions. And
there's actually more story here than I expected.
So basically, April and Splinter have been kidnapped, and we, as the Turtles, have to go rescue them. So I guess we're traveling across the United States, though for some reason. That's the person
I got. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I got. But like the Statue of Liberty is somehow located in Ohio now, Kansas somewhere around there. But whatever. But yeah, so you go through each level / state, I guess, defeating different enemies, and the obviously the characters, as they're beaten, will give you info on the next location you need to go to. And it progresses from there, and it's pretty good. I you know what I mean? Like, I didn't at any point feel like, it was being cheap or anything like that. You definitely have to rely more on your skill in the story mode than you do in tournament mode, because the mutagen meter is not available to you.
Yep.
Which I can see why they did that, because if you're playing tournament edition, there are ways that you can really cheese and just let the enemy kind of hit you a few times to build up that meter, and then just continually do special moves.
Right, yeah.
You know what I mean? And completely beat them. So I can understand why they didn't allow you on this one. But also, kind of disappointed that you can only choose the 4 turtles. I get why, but also, come on. Get rid of tournament mode and just give me story mode with all characters unlocked. And then, there was a lot of, animated scrolling stuff that, was in the background of the stages, which, we had already talked about. So those were really the only things I wanted to point out. And the big difference, obviously, being what I'm familiar with the Genesis version. Like I said earlier, the story mode takes place on Dimension X, so you're traveling to different planets. And in my opinion, the idea of traveling to different planets to fight different characters has more of an appeal than just using the turtle blimp to fly around the United States.
I agree with that.
But I felt they framed it pretty well, where they kind of put War as the main bad guy until he's not the main bad guy and ends up being Karai. So I mean, I like that aspect of it as well. But I would have liked to at least been able to play as more than the 4 turtles. But it is what it is.
Yeah, and we should also comment here, real quick. The game is, with fighting games, the game is fairly short. We know what you're doing, because both tournament mode and story mode, about a half an hour gameplay. We're good at it. So I mean, but getting good, that's where you're gonna spend the time at. So, because especially when you mix and match characters.
Right.
So, all right. Well, we already talked a little bit about this. So, as it makes sense to segue like Genesis version of the game, since Joe was talking about it. Since you had this version, since you had this version growing up, Joe, talk about this game, because I think there are advantages and also disadvantages of the Genesis version versus the Super NES version. So I'm curious to hear, your experience of the game and what you think of it.
So, for the longest time, that was the only version I knew.
True. Yeah.
So there's that. And like I said, it's very odd that with the Genesis version, it's all heroes that you're playing as. You have the 4 turtles, you have Manta Ray, Casey Jones, which is a nice addition. I think we were supposed to get Oscar or Mitsuku also, but they changed her to April. And then there was like this beetle character. I can't remember his name at the moment.
I actually was surprised to see April like in this game because I think this is the first time April actually there was. I think it's the first time. She's not been playable in a video game very much. It's
right.
I think it's like this game and like this game, Shredder's Revenge, and that's it.
Yeah.
I think so. I would say that's definitely a plus in the favor of the Genesis version. Being able to play either as her or Casey Jones are very nice additions.
Yeah, and then with the story mode obviously taking place in Dimension X, you have the Triceratons, or at least one of them that you get to fight. Karai obviously shows up in this one as well. And then you also have the body of Krang with Krang in the belly. Those are your boss characters.
I did not have fun fighting him.
Yeah, I mean, I really felt like it got cheap as it got further into the game, and I'd always felt that way. I don't think I ever actually beat Tournament Fighters for the Genesis.
Really?
And I think it was just one of those, like, there were other games at the time that were better that I had for the Genesis. And I didn't feel I needed to. Like, it was one of those, okay, I want to fight as the Turtles. I can go fight as the Turtles. But sometimes, like, I didn't want that fighting style. So, therefore, I had Hyperstone Heist. I can go do the beat-em-up arcade thing. So, I enjoyed the Genesis game for what it was, because it was all I had at the time. But definitely after playing the Super Nintendo version, I will say the Super Nintendo version is the far superior version, in my opinion.
Well, most people agree with you on that point. Spoiler, but
yeah.
I will say playing the Genesis version in the collection for the first time, there are some gameplay differences. There are some gameplay differences in the Genesis version that I actually like. I prefer compared to the Super NES version. Again, like Joe mentioned, you have the limitation line with the 3-button controller because this game came out before or right about the same time as 6-button controller came out, so we didn't have support for that. The taunt button being here is interesting addition. I'm not the biggest fan of it, but it is interesting to see it here that there's a taunt button because I can't think of too many fighting games that had taunt buttons. You know more fighting games than I do, Joe. Like, do you think another example?
I was trying to think of, because, that's what I purposely omitted that because of the fact that I really can't think of any other games that had
I'm sure there was
a dedicated
at least
taunt
one.
button.
Yeah.
Part of me wants to say like Saturday Night Slam Masters, maybe.
Oh, we haven't covered that yet.
Right, we haven't covered that for the Super Nintendo, and that's another one I had for the Genesis.
Right, yeah.
And I think there was a taunt button in that game, but don't quote me on that. But yeah, I think this is one of the first games where you could really, taunt somebody.
Yeah. You also can do a killer attack in this version of the game, like close to death, which is something I wish the Super NES version had.
Well, that's why they have the mutagen bar.
Yeah, I guess, but I prefer the killer attack though. I think like the killer attack seems to do like more damage, I think, but it's hard to pull off, I think, because you have to use that stupid 3-button Genesis controller. But,
right.
Also, I was surprised to see desirable background scenery in the version of the game. I don't remember. I did not find that in the Super NES version of the game. So I don't think the Super NES version of the game has that.
Yeah.
I don't know why they have it in this. I'm not sure why they have it in this game versus the other game, but whatever. So, So the music also in this game, I think, is also. I actually like the music of the Genesis version of the game a little bit better, and I think it's because that they asked a legendary video game composer like Miki Habashiro to work on it, who's best known for the Suikoden games. So it's very good music. I think I actually prefer the Genesis version of the game, the Genesis music, a little bit over Super NES version, like even though both of them have very good soundtracks.
Yeah, I was going to say, I like both soundtracks. I can't really choose between the two, to be honest.
But yeah, we were talking about the graphics. I don't know why they have that, have that more darker, more grainier look to them. But, They still look fine. I mean, it's still like a very like pretty game, but yeah. They only made the enhancements to this game, this version of the game, Tournament Fighters, allows you to play as the 3 bosses, so that increases the roster,
right.
The roster playable characters like to 11. And that's pretty much it. For some reason, that's the only real dedicated enhancements to this game that they made compared to the NES and Super NES versions of the game for some reason. So, speaking of that, why don't we finish up with the NES talk? And it's like, the NES version of the game, considering the hardware it's on, this is a very good. This is a very good version of the game, I thought. It's like, yes, it is the weakest version of the game, but considering this came out in 1994 and the NES was on its last legs, because this game pushes because obvious, this game pushes the hardware hard.
Yeah.
Because there definitely is like flicker and or slowdown in some parts of the game for sure with this. In fact, Konami made changes to the game to make the game run smoother during development. We'll talk about here in a moment, but it's like any console. Late game releases are fascinating to me because it's like because toward the end of the console's lifespan, you get experienced programmers, experienced teams, extra hardware. It's like years and years of experience of learning how to wring every little last little bit of a system. It's very fascinating to me to see how an early game compares versus like a late game. It's like this is like a great late NES game to show somebody look what the system was doing like last of your life, because it's pretty impressive. I would have been happy with this as a kid because it's not a bad version of the game. It's like as I said before, it is limited, but that's more the hardware limitations. I'm surprised Konami even decided to make an NES port of this game to begin with. They obviously felt the market was still big enough for them to make money on it. So
yeah.
So obviously the controls are okay because you're limited. Because you only have 2 main buttons. On the NES controller, of course, but there is the there's standard story mode, tournament mode. Tournament mode does support 4 players like versus the tablet, which is a nice touch.
Yeah.
So this is one version of the game that supports like 4 players, which I thought was like pretty nice. So, you have like so you have Casey Jones. Casey Jones like the boss. Hothead, who I never heard of, is also a boss. Mm-hmm. He is apparently based off the character Dragon Warrior from the comics. Yes. So you also can play. You also like to fight yourself in this version of the game, which you could not do with the Genesis version of the games, also, which is also like a nice touch, I thought. All except for Hothead, you cannot do out of the box. You cannot do Hothead versus Hothead because the programmers discovered during testing that simply just caused too much gameplay slowdown. But however, there's a code in the game, which we'll talk about here later on, that allows you to bypass that restriction. So if you really want to play Hothead versus Hothead, you can. So, which is interesting. So, did you check this version out at all, Joe?
So I played this a few times in the past, but I did not play it for the podcast. But from what I remember, it's obviously a very capable fighter for being on the NES. It looks good, it sounds good, and it plays a lot better than I thought it would.
Yes, yeah.
that's the big one right there. It's like I remember, firing it up, and thinking it was going to be a dumpster fire, which is honestly the expectation you should have. Yeah, you know what I mean?
No, because I'd argue that. Yeah, I'd actually argue the opposite because I'm like, this was Konami talking about here. I would argue there's not a single bad Konami NES game. They're all very good at least. So, because, they were, as I said before, they were at their peak in the 90s.
Right.
They knew what they were doing. So, and again, they had the resources and time to dedicate it, to have a dedicated team of people who probably been programming the system for like 7 years at this point.
Yeah.
You making the game, So yeah, see, I was also surprised by how well the game plays because I knew it was going to be okay. The game was better than I expected it to be though, because, again, considering the limitations of the system. So, my biggest issue with the game was the controls, but again, that can't be helped because you only have so many buttons, on the controller.
You have unrealistic expectations, Greg.
However, Cowabunga Collection does have some very, you just have some very nice enhancements to the game if you want to, available you want to use them. There's an option to remove slowdown. There's an option to remove there's an option to remove sprite flicker, and there's also an option called Clash the Hotheads, which basically just taking that code from the original NES version of the game and allowing you to play. To play Hothead versus Hothead. It's strongly recommended that you turn on both remove slowdown and sprite flicker before you do that though, because otherwise you're the same issue the programmers did back in the day. So
yeah,
but it's it's fun playing it's fun playing this game on what if the NES was enhanced a little bit more to allow for this game to be a little bit more smooth?
Yeah.
Well, here it is. Here's your version of the game for you, which is interesting. I'm glad they took the time and effort to put that in.
Yeah, and this is one of the games that I think really is improved by being on the Cowabunga Collection because this game really was bad as far as flicker and slowdown and whatnot, and
it pushed the system so hard.
right, and it's completely understandable. I mean, if you want to get into technical terms, this is the only one-on-one fighter on the NES, and I mean that in a traditional sense as we see like Street Fighter and whatnot. Other games like Mighty Final Fight, Kung Fu, those are considered fighting games. Urban Champion is another one.
At least,
but this was like.
Let me call that statement. At least an official release, because there were bootleg copies of Street Fighter, whatever, done for the system in other countries. But which play pretty badly. Spoiler.
Yeah, and I was gonna say some people took the Game Boy games and ROM hacked them over to the NES. So, you get things like Mortal Kombat in the NES, just horrendous. But yes, officially, this is the only one-on-one fighter. So, I mean, they have to be, congratulated for that at least.
Yeah. I think limitations aside, like I said, as a kid, this would have been a very decent fighting game to play with because it's it still captures the essence of its big Big Brother version of the game. Just it boils down pretty well to an 8-bit package. So
yeah.
It was fun playing all three versions of the game back to back in the Cowabunga Collection, comparing and contrasting them, because it's and having done that, I came to the same conclusion that you did. The Super NES version of the game is the best version of the game. I wish that there are advantages. There are advantages like Genesis version of the game, like I said before. But I think that overall, just the controls and the graphics, just give the Super NES version of the game the nod as far as that goes. I think so. Which you already said that you agreed on, so we don't need to argue that point any further. And most people felt that, and most people agree with us. Both contemporary and modern reviews gave the Super NES version of the game the best, the highest marks.
Yep.
So, something else. So something else also, you have more experience playing the Genesis version of the game than I did, Joe, and like I said, all my time was spent on the Cowabunga Collection, which maybe they tweaked it a little bit for that, without saying anything. Some of the contemporary reviews of the Genesis version of the game said it played much more sluggishly compared to the Super NES version of the game. Did you feel that way?
So, playing the Super Nintendo version this time around, I definitely felt it moves a little quicker and not as sluggish.
Which is surprising. Which surprising. Like considering that usually the opposite was true because the Genesis had the faster processor, so it's like that makes sense that version of the game might be faster. So
yeah,
I'm surprised to hear that.
I think again that kind of, I mean, it's hard to explain. So I don't know if it's the way like the animations are done or what, but it's like if you do a jump kick in the Super Nintendo version, like you feel like that momentum, there. Whereas like, I don't know, like doing the same thing with the Genesis version of the game, it does feel like there's a bit of maybe a delay, but I mean, it's been a while since I've played.
Again, that could be down to programming.
Right.
The programming, programming. It's like I don't really know. It's like, it was just surprising to hear that because like
I mean, and to be fair, like I would highly recommend anybody who's going to play these games, get the Cowabunga Collection.
Definitely,
and that's the definitive way to play it nowadays. You don't have that slowdown. It's not going to feel that sluggish. They're going to feel pretty good, just my opinion.
Yeah, exactly. So, so overall, like, so what are our final thoughts? How do you think this game compares to other like beat 'em up games available on the system? And do you think this game did a pretty good reputation, like it being like a Turtles franchise game?
So as far as being a Turtle franchise game, fantastic. I think this was a great addition. And this is something that like you kind of bang your head against the wall and go, how did it take them this long to come up with this idea? Because you would think like this would have been like something that they would have tried to do before. And maybe they did, and that's the whole reason why they did release Tournament Fighters on the NES. Maybe they were trying this entire time to get a fighter to work on, the Nintendo, and it just couldn't happen. And then they figured out how to scale it down and be able to get it to work. That is very good, very good possibility. That being said, I think today there are better fighters. I would highly recommend, obviously, the Super Street Fighter game, even Street Fighter Alpha, which we discussed, and Mortal Kombat, Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3. I think all those games are better than this. But if you look at the games that were released at the time, there was a lot of weird games like Art of Fighting and stuff that were like ported from the SNK over to the Super NES. You have the original Street Fighter, because Championship didn't come out for the Super Nintendo until much later. Mortal Kombat 1, I think by 93 there might have been on the cusp of Mortal Kombat 2 coming. So, I mean, when you put it into that perspective of what was out at the time, this is pretty good. This is a really good effort by Konami. But as far as, like I was saying, like looking at it in the angles of time, I don't think it holds up very well at all.
I'm a little surprised to hear you say that. I agree with most of what you're saying. I thought this game was an excellent addition to the Turtles franchise, and it's like, like it's a money grab, yes, but it's a very well done money
right.
grab because of course Konami was the one to fully program the games, and like I've already gushed about like how great they were during those time periods, but as a fighting game, contemporary like its peers, early '90s, I thought this game I thought this game was very good. Probably even better than Street Fighter 2 in some ways. I thought until the later Street Fighter 2s came out, which had which had all the enhancements and additions to them. But nowadays, I think if you're either a Turtle fan or a fighting game fan, I think this game is still like worth checking out. I mean, especially if you have the Cowabunga Collection, because I think you still fire up the game, the Cowabunga Collection, and have some fun with it like for a while. I mean, are you going to play it for months like you probably did if you were a kid back in the day with the game? No, but I think that the game is still solid enough, I think, especially with the enhancements the collection offers. You know, that you definitely sort of, you definitely flip, that you totally like fire this game up. You know, have some fun with it, especially like in online mode. Your online mode being included with this game net play as well on the collection. Also, I think also add some replayability value to this game. So, in broad strokes, I agree with you. This is not a game you're going to spend a lot of time with, but I think overall, you know, it's still a decent game. Especially if you're a Turtle fan and or a fighting game fan, at least for a little bit, because there are many worse fighting games that came out during this time period, which we've already talked about a little bit. So
yeah, and I just want to correct one thing. So of course I did a quick Google search. So I'm showing 5 games were released for the Super Nintendo in 1993 that were fighters. Obviously, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Tournament Fighter. Yeah. Then we had Fatal Fury Special, which, I mean, depends on how you feel about your SNK fighting games. Samurai Showdown, same thing. Depends on how you feel about your SNK fighting games. But the biggest contenders, Super Street Fighter 2 came out in 93, and so did Mortal Kombat 2.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, I mean, I still hold true to what I said. Even with the contemporaries now changing to, you know, from Street Fighter 2 and Mortal Kombat 1 to the sequels of those games, I still feel this game, you know, it deserves to be definitely talked about in that conversation. But I think given the track history of Mortal Kombat 2 and Super Street Fighter 2, I don't know. I just feel Tournament Fighters does not hold up. But that's me.
Well, I think also part of it is the fact that I think that, and Joe, I think you'll agree with me with I think you'll agree with me on this. Some franchises have not changed very much over the last 30 years. Which like, you know, the basic, of course the games, of course the games are going to be different. You know, better graphics, better music, quality of life enhancements, whatever. But there are some genres of games which really have not fundamentally changed a lot in 30 years. Like, you know, like shooters are still shooters.
Right.
For example, but fighting games, I think, are one of the franchises that has probably changed the most in the last 30 years between Street Fighter 2 versus like now. But it's like, fighting games now are like night and day different. Vastly different. Absolutely. Compared to their counterpart 30 years ago.
Right.
It's hard to go back to a game 30 years ago in a genre like this, which has changed so much. Unless you have, like you and I do, nostalgia. Either nostalgia or a love for the franchise that game was based upon. So it's like, and there are other franchises that have the same problem. Sports games, for example,
yes,
suffer this problem big time. First person shooters, I think probably suffer from this problem because I think that that's more of a complicated issue. I think yes, to some degree, maybe not as much as like fighting games do, but I think that. I think like the problem is most obvious with it's most obvious to see with like fighting games and sports games, but it's like. But
I definitely hear what you're saying about first person shooters because prime example, like you play a modern first person shooter now, more than likely there's plenty of ammo that drops. You have regenerative health, whereas if you were playing Doom or anything within like the first 10 years of the first person shooter genre, you are limited on your ammo, so you have to be strategic in the way that you would attack certain things, and it was all health pickups. There was no regeneration. So you know, and you could argue whether that's improved for the better or what, but you know, everyone's going to have their own opinion as far as, you know, especially with the way genres change and what do change with them. Like,
of course,
I mean, if you have not played any fighting game before the year, we'll go with 2022. If you haven't played any fighting game, you know, before that year, you will probably find this to be archaic, slow, and incomparable, you know.
True, I'll agree with all that.
Right, because now it's all about combos. It's the super speed. I mean, Marvel vs. Capcom changed the game as far as, you know, the speed of the characters, the ability of doing the moves. The core inner structure is still the same. It's still your quarter circles and your taps and all that other stuff. But, you know, now it's all focused on combos, tagging, and all that stuff. So I can see if, you know, you are a younger listener and not well seasoned like Greg and I, that, you know, you may find our opinion, you know, very, very different than what yours is.
Of course.
But yeah, I mean, like I said, my opinion, I still think it's a good game. I think you should definitely check it out. Are there better games that I feel that you should play on the Super NES? Yes. But you know what? If you've already played your Mortal Kombat 2s, you played your Ultimate Mortal Kombat, you played all the Street Fighters, you've done all that, and you're just looking for something new and unique, then guess what? You should be checking out TMNT Tournament Fighters.
Let me ask you like one last question then, like about that. When this came out in 1993, do you like comparing this game to everything else that was available let's include arcades as well as like as well as like no, that's a bit unfair because it was a very sizable difference between arcades and consoles at this time period.
Yeah, I was gonna say like we're talking 93. I mean, we're talking like. You know, Killer Instinct is roaring through the arcades at this time, and you can't compare that game to this game.
Right? Yeah. Sorry. I forgot. I forgot the whole like retro thing here for a moment. So let me back up for a moment. So for the fighting games available at home for your Super NES for Super NES or Genesis or whatever in 1993, I would argue that at the time period, 1993. And I was surprised by this. Surprised by myself to come to this realization because I said I hadn't spent a lot of time in this game before playing the podcast. I think at the time this came out, this was the best fighting game on the system, bar none. And it wasn't surpassed until a couple years later when Mortal Kombat, probably not even Mortal Kombat 2, because Mortal Kombat 2 kind of got nuked a little bit in the Super NES. I think like Mortal Kombat 3 and some of the Street Fighter games were the ones that finally improved upon this, circa 1995. But I think what was available at the time, this was the best, if not one of the best fighting games on the system. So, would you agree or disagree with that?
I mean, looking at the contemporaries, yeah, I would agree with that. I can tell you from my personal experience from owning it for the Genesis, I bought this because of the TMT license. And,
of course.
Konami knew I was going to do that. So, there's that. That being said, this, I in all honesty, I think I beat this or came close to beating this game once and pretty much never touched it again. I have vivid memories of playing this game for the Genesis, but I don't remember spending a lot of time with it on the Genesis. My core memories are with Mortal Kombat 2, Super Street Fighter, and Street Fighter 2, and even like King of Monsters, I would play over this, you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. I'm curious if your experiences and time spent on the game would have been different, just like would have been different if you had the Super NES version, like instead of the Genesis version. There's no way of knowing, of course. I'm just like speculating out loud.
Yeah, and I really can't say whether the results would be the same or not. My buddy had a Super Nintendo. I'd go over his house and play, but at the time, like, he didn't have this game. We were playing either Street Fighter, which he absolutely hated because I would school him every single time. But on the same hand, like, we'd play Mortal Kombat and he'd kill me and, do fatalities every single time. So it was a good balance. But, I just, this unfortunately fell to the wayside with me as far as with the Genesis. And then even more so once I got the Power Rangers fighting game that we discussed last week, last episode.
Okay,
like I had the Genesis version, and like it was a straight one-on-one fighter. All the characters kind of played the same because you could only be the Power Rangers, and they all kind of had the same moves and whatever else. But even like compared to that game, I would give this one the nod over the Power Rangers one. So
sure, okay, yeah. So I could not find anything talking about sales figures, unfortunately, because that figure, because as we've talked about before in the past, sales figures for like games this time period were like hard to find.
Yeah.
I did find one reference saying that Konami said that all versions of the games altogether sold over 1 million copies. And I also found another reference to the fact that the game was the best-selling game like in the UK for a month. So the game seems like it sold pretty well. I don't know how. Like I said, unfortunately, I can't say anything more than that. But based upon eBay pricing, which we'll get to in a moment, most people kept the cart and got rid of the box. It looks like for some reason, which is like. It's weird. It's like there's a huge difference. I mean, there usually is a good difference between cart versus CIB, but for this game, it's a remarkably huge difference. So I don't know why that was.
Yeah,
but...
and that's the thing. So like because I did a little poking and prodding before. So like the way I see it is like when you do the eBay sold listings and whatnot. Those are usually pretty good indicators on how the game sold or didn't sell in its time. The NES,
with some exceptions, like
right. So with the NES game being a late release, you're looking at anywhere from 200 to 250. Way more, even if you have the box and manual. Yeah. So I mean, like that's and that's to be expected. It's a late NES game.
Right.
And then like the Genesis game can be got for anywhere from like $10 to $50, and that's sometimes with the box and manual.
Yeah, the Genesis had the same retro boom that the Super NES did, but the Genesis bubble was not as big or as long as the Super NES was for some reason. I'm not sure why that was.
That's because people went back and realized that the Gems FM sound is just not that great. And like, there were some people who did really good with it, and then there's others that it sounds like cats yelling and everything else.
Konami, for example, great music in their games always, Treasure also knew how to work a Genesis sound trip. Their games sound amazing. Capcom was pretty good too. I thought the Genesis sound chip. I mean, their games sounded pretty good.
Yeah, absolutely.
But even Sega themselves with some of their games, it's some Sega games have great music, like Phantasy Star games, excellent soundtracks. But other Sega games are like, what the hell is this? But
exactly.
It's weird, but yeah. So I definitely agree with all that. But we'll get into pricing here in just a moment. I just want to mention real quick. The Super NES version of the game did have six cheat codes. Most of these cheat codes are represented by options that you can use in the Cowabunga Collection if you want to. So the one addition that the one code Super NES version had that is not available in the Cowabunga Collection is the ability to have the mutant bar turned on in story mode.
Oh, okay. So
they did not carry that over to the Cowabunga Collection for some reason, but the other ones they did.
So is it a button combination to be able to enable it?
Yep.
And you can't do that in the Cowabunga Collection?
It's not. I don't remember seeing it. It's not listed as one of the features.
Right, but if you actually put in the inputs, would it actually go through? That's the question.
Oh,
because it's emulation. It should work.
Yeah. I actually didn't think about that because it requires a controller too, which I didn't bother.
Okay, yeah.
But most of these codes require require like controller too. So, yes, in case you're wondering, the Konami code plays one of the codes.
Nice.
The Konami code on Control 2 turns on speed level 3, which is the super fast mode that again is present in Cowabunga Collection. Anyway, on to pricing. As Joe mentioned, the pricing in this game is not that bad because it's sold. Like I said, it sold reasonably well. 76 copies of the game listed on eBay as been researched. 96 copies of the game sold recently. These prices include shipping, and these are all for sold copies. Card Anywhere sold anywhere from like $15 to $61. So, I imagine the Cowabunga Collection coming out last year probably drove the prices down some. I don't know. Unfortunately, eBay doesn't have history going back that far. And Price Charter and other sites looked at indicated that yes, there was a decline, but I can't say how much of a decline, but there was with the Cowabunga Collection coming out. So, CIB copies though, as I said before, the pricing definitely is a lot. The pricing definitely gets more crazy.
Yeah.
Those starting with $120 to $160. So it's like, why this game is so much more expensive than CIB? I don't know. It's like maybe because kids were playing it and not take care of their stuff.
Yeah, I mean that's a pretty good reason.
But I myself kept my manners in boxes personally, but I know many people that they didn't do that.
So it's funny because with our NES games, and I was a bit younger when I had my NES, but we'd take the gray card out of the box, with the dust cover, and that box would get chucked. The manual would get tucked into the black dust cover with the game, and that'd be that. And the same thing with the, Game Boy games when we had Game Boy. Those cardboard boxes got chucked right away. So, I mean, I think my Genesis was the only system I can remember other than...
It didn't help the cardboard boxes. It definitely did help the cardboard. It definitely did not help the cardboard. The cardboard box is not that durable either. Right. So it's like early Genesis games... I miss the early Genesis games released my clamshell box, which I thought was a much better design. Yeah. So... but also more expensive to produce, which is why they stopped doing it after a while. Yep. But PlayStation was the same thing. PlayStation games originally came out long box style,
right?
Before that cut cost and cut it down to the CD, the CD wannabe that it was most of its lifespan.
Yeah, which was a much better design.
Yeah,
especially for shelf space.
Having just said what I did about the CIB copies of the game, Joe, let's play guessing game again. How much, guess how much the sealed copy of the game sold for?
And you said it was between
sealed.
What was it for loose cart?
CIB was anywhere from $120 to $160. And we're talking one sealed copy of the game sold recently. I'm telling you, pristine condition. I'm
gonna say, and we're talking sealed, factory sealed.
Factory sealed, great shape, no dents, no rips, no tears, beautiful copy.
I'm gonna say, and I think I'm kind of being generous with this, but I'm gonna say 600.
Ooh, you gotta go way up.
Really?
That's why I said this game is rare and good condition for some reason, because it's try 1451.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So almost $1,500.
I mean, I guess that makes sense. I mean, think about it. How many people are collecting sealed in box?
Not
you know what I mean?
So
I can see.
Market, So, I mean, but there are people who have complete NES and NES Super NES collections of sealed copies.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I mean, yes, the market's smart, but there's a group of them out there.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
Considering, like I said, again, I don't think based upon the card pricing, I think that for the card pricing, I think this game sold pretty well in Super NES because $15 for Super NES games is pretty cheap.
Yeah.
So I think the game sold well good on the Super NES, but obviously, like I said, for some reason, the box's manuals just did not survive very well for this game for some reason.
Yeah.
And there are other games like that. For some reason, just we have more examples of this surviving than that is surviving for whatever reason.
Right.
So, but yeah, I don't know. It's weird, But because the manual would be helpful with this game back in the day, because the manual tells you because unless you have access to like a magazine that said all this, the manuals where you had to go to find out the combos and everything. So unless you want to spend unless you want to spend all the time trial and error trying to figure it out yourself, and it's like, what's the point? Because you're playing a home version of a game, you're not in the arcade trying to drop in quarters figuring out what the combos are. So It's like. The main version, the advantage of home version of the game is quarter free play. So it's like, of course you want to know the combos, but and again, unless you had the magazine that said this, the manuals like where you had to go to. So I don't know, nothing important about it, but it's just interesting.
Yeah.
So. Anyway, so thank you very much for our deep dive, like Tournament Fighters, both the Super NES and other versions that were out there. Sadly, there's only two. There's only two Turtles games in Super NES, so we will not be returning this franchise. But both Turtles games, the system like were very like good games. I definitely, obviously, I spent, I owned and spent a lot more time on Turtle Time, but, which is an awesome game, and it's still an awesome game to play today, I think. But, like the Cowabunga Collection version of the game is excellent. It's like a really good enhancement to the original game, which already was 9 out of 10 game to begin with. So, but anyway, so. We have other fighting games coming up for you, though. So if you are a fighting game fan, by all means, stay tuned. I think, looking at the list here, we have another one coming up.
By the end of May.
Yeah,
early June.
Probably. Yeah, Mortal Kombat Trilogy. I'm not quite sure exactly when we're going to get to that one. We have been delayed because of health issues and holidays and whatnot. Yeah. But we will get to that one in several games. So stay tuned. Next up, though, like an obscure pick from Joe that I didn't even heard of. So, some game called Biker Mice from Mars.
Yeah. So
I know nothing about this.
The ironic thing being that because of the success of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, they spun off a bunch of wannabe shows. Of
course,
Battletoads, Street Sharks. And Biker Mice from Mars is one of those shows. And it's a isometric racing game. So it's definitely very reminiscent of like rock and roll racing, which I don't know if you've covered on the podcast. But yeah, so it's very reminiscent of that, but it's got its own little flair. I look forward to talking about it. I look forward to playing it again. It's been a while since I played the game.
Is this a platformer?
No, this is strictly racing.
Racing only.
Yeah.
Okay. Huh. All right. Well, we haven't covered racing game in a while, so it should be. There should be interesting.
Yeah.
But, okay. Alrighty then. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen to us, as always. If you have any questions, comments, feedback, suggestions, feel free to leave us a comment on our Facebook group, or you can also send me an email directly at the SNES Podcast @yahoo.com. Joe, where can they reach you at?
You can find me on Twitter at JOESUX30. Also, I have a very public Facebook. And at this point, I'm tired of saying the entire thing for the Radical Retro Roundup. So just Google Radical Retro Roundup. It comes up usually as the number one thing.
Facebook. It's on Facebook too.
Yeah. So, I have the Radical Retro Roundup on Facebook as well. We're actually going to be possibly recording an episode next Saturday. So, tons of episodes already up. It is not family friendly, so just a heads up, because I know the fan base here is family friendly, so I don't want you jumping over there and being surprised. But I was going to say there should be no surprise when you find out that my co-host is George, who used to be the co-host here, and he's been known to have some colorful language himself. So yeah.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of user data, unfortunately, but based upon the few comments I have received about the podcast, and also based upon user data from Libsyn or whatever, I can't tell you that we have listeners to this podcast ranging anywhere from age from 12 to 65.
Yeah.
So, pretty good age range there, which I'm happy about. So, Mostly Americans, listeners, that's to be expected.
Yeah,
so,
yeah. I found out I'm very popular in India. I assume that they're using my voice with AI technology to probably scam people, unfortunately. But I did find it very interesting that a good portion of my listeners are in India. It's the same thing with my YouTube channel too, which is crazy. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's a large population, so I guess.
Yeah,
No, but okay.
Yep.
Alrighty. So, all right, we've kept everybody here long enough. Thanks again for listening as always. We'll catch you again then next time. So, take care, all. Be well, and see you again soon.
Cowabunga!
Nintendo controls 80% of the video market. But no matter how you play the game, or which game you play, things definitely have come a long way since Pac-Man.
Now you're playing with power. Super power.